There was no wind when he found her. No bird song, no hoofbeats, no sound at all. Just the creak of rope and the slow spin of something human dangling beneath a crooked piñon tree. She wasn't dead. That was the first thing the rancher saw and didn't understand. Her boots barely touched the ground, worn soles brushing dry dirt in slow, helpless circles. Her arms had gone limp. Her head slumped sideways, jet black hair hiding the bruises on her neck like curtains pulled over a broken window. Around her neck, the wood sign swung like a gallows bell. Burned into it, with blackened iron, "White man wants revenge." The letters weren't sloppy. They were carved with purpose, like someone wanted the message to linger, even longer than the girl. He didn't move. Not at first. The sun beat down, hot and blank. His horse snorted behind him. Sweat dripped from the brim of his hat. And still he didn't move, because it wasn't the hanging that stopped him. It was her eyes. She looked right at him. Through the dark curtain of her hair, one eye had cracked open just barely, and it held him there like a bullet frozen in midair. Not pleading, not even afraid, just waiting, like she'd already seen every man ride by and do nothing. And she knew he might do the same. She was young, 12, maybe 13, Apache by her dress, and small, too small for the weight of any man's war to be hung on her. He stepped down. Boot heel met dust. Not like a hero, more like a man cursed, like someone who couldn't stop his own hands from acting. He didn't shout, didn't draw his knife. He walked. Each step cracked the silence, dry grass whispering beneath his soles. The girl didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't breathe any louder than the dead. Up close, he could see her neck was raw. The rope had cut into her skin but hadn't broken it. Someone had meant for her to stay alive for a while. A message, a warning, or worse. The sign bounced softly as he reached for it. She didn't blink. He touched the wood rough, splintered and hot from the sun. And in that moment, the symbol became something more than words. White man wants revenge. But for what? What could a girl that small have done to deserve that his hands trembled not from fear, but from something older? A memory he hadn't touched in years. A loss he didn't speak of. A face in a coffin. Once, he cut her down. The knife didn't hiss. It didn't need to. The sound of the rope fraying was enough to still the air around them. When it snapped, she crumpled into his arms like dust returning to earth. She didn't cry. That's what struck him most. Her eyes stayed open, alert, alive. But dry like all her tears had been stolen long before the rope ever touched her throat. He carried her to his horse, which took a single step back when it smelled the blood. And there was blood, dried at the corners of her mouth, caked on her knees. Someone had dragged her. There were still scuff marks in the dirt. And that sign, he left it, nailed to the tree. Let the land read its own shame. As he placed her gently in the saddle before him, she winced, but only slightly. He adjusted the reins around her waist, held her steady with one arm. The sun was beginning to sink now, turning the rocks orange. Coyotes watched from far ridges, but they didn't approach. Even they respected this silence. He rode slow, not toward town. He hadn't set foot in town for 5 years, but toward his ranch, toward whatever life was left in a place that once knew laughter and firelight. The wind picked up behind them. And as it did, the sign still swung in the tree, creaking louder now, like it was trying to follow, like it refused to be left behind. That was the first time he heard it, a low, rusted whisper no louder than breath, but filled with an ancient wound, a word, maybe a name, or maybe just the sound of something inside her refusing to die. He didn't ask her to repeat it. He only pulled the reins tighter, turned her face from the sun, and rode on. And in his mind, though he couldn't name it yet, the sign burned clearer than ever. A curse, not just on her, but on him too. Something had been set in motion now, something carved deeper than words. As they crested the ridge toward his ranch, the wind blew strands of her hair across his knuckles. She didn't pull away, didn't look up, but for a second barely there he thought he felt the pressure of her head leaning, just slightly, against his chest, like she was testing the weight of being held again. Like she was wondering if it would break her. The ranch wasn't much. 3 posts leaned like tired men. The barn was missing half its roof. The house sagged into the prairie, its porch held up by a whiskey crate and a prayer. He didn't speak as he rode in, didn't call out. There was no one to call to, just him. And now, her. He tied the reins to a weather-warped hitching post, the horse snorting low with dust and fatigue. Then he stepped off. His boots hit the ground like he hadn't touched the earth in years. The girl still hadn't moved. Her weight against him was light, too light. He could feel the outlines of each bone, the sharp edge of starvation wrapped in skin and silence. He carried her, through the old gate, which squeaked in protest, up the porch where a wasp nest hung in the corner like a forgotten threat, into the house, where time had stopped. The floorboards groaned. He paused in the doorway, unsure if this place where even his memories were afraid to live was safe enough for her. But there were no other options. He laid her on the old cot by the stove. The mattress exhaled dust. She didn't cough. He crouched, reached for the canteen beside the hearth, opened it slowly and tilted it toward her lips. The water touched her mouth, but she didn't drink. Only watched him, like she wasn't sure what kind of man cut down a stranger and then brought them here. Like she was waiting for the second half of the cruelty to begin. He didn't push. Instead, he turned to the stove, struck a match. Flame caught dry wood with a snap, the orange glow flickering across their faces. She flinched at the light, not from heat, but from memory. He said the first word since finding her. Safe. Just that. One word. It hung in the room like smoke. She didn't react. He turned to gather more wood. His hand brushed an old saddlebag, worn thin at the corners. A feather was tucked into the leather strap, black and white, striped like a memory. He paused, touching it briefly before returning to the fire. The room warmed. She hadn't blinked. Outside, a hawk cried once, long, lonely. He brought her broth later hot, saltless, made from beans and old jerky. He held the spoon to her lips. This time she took it. One sip, then another. He didn't smile, didn't talk. She coughed once after the third, just a dry rattle in her chest. He set the bowl down and wiped her chin with the edge of his shirt sleeve. The fire cracked behind them. Still. No name. No question. He never asked where she came from. Because he already knew the answer. She came from where the world ends. Where the frontier pretends to be lawless, but every wrong still wears a name. She came from the edge of someone else's justice. He brought out an old wool blanket, coarse but clean, and draped it over her shoulders. Her eyes closed briefly. He didn't know if it was exhaustion or trust, maybe both. Outside, the moon rose. He sat by the door, rifle across his lap, not to scare her, but to face what might come after. She didn't sleep, neither did he. Only the fire breathed between them. The house creaked, like bones shifting in the wind. The kettle hissed softly, echoing the pulse of time slowing down. He looked at her once, just once, and saw it. Her hand, small and bruised, was curled around the edge of the cot, and in her palm, a single strand of horsehair. Chestnut, from his own mare, clutched like a thread of proof that the world still had weight. He said the second word that night. Tomorrow. That was all. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he dreamed of something besides loss. Just before dawn, as the fire burned low and the sky turned the color of old tin, he opened his eyes and saw her standing, barefoot, still wrapped in the blanket. She was staring at the stove, not afraid, just studying it, like she was trying to remember what warmth used to feel like. She didn't notice him watching, but when he stood and stepped forward, slow and quiet, she didn't flinch when he reached for her arm. She let him guide her back to the cot, and this time, when she lay down, she closed her eyes without fear. The next day broke slow, Gray light seeped in through the warped boards like it was unsure whether it was welcome. The rancher stirred the ashes in the stove with quiet care, coaxing flame from cinders that never quite died. He didn't look toward the cot. He didn't need to. He could feel she was awake, not moving, not speaking but awake. He placed the tin cup near the fire to warm and poured water from the canteen. A few loose leaves floated in its sagebrush tea, the kind that settled a stomach and didn't ask much else of you. Behind him, the cot creaked once. He turned. She was sitting upright, still wrapped in the wool blanket, still silent, but upright and watching. Her face in the morning light was something scraped clean by survival, cheekbones like sharpened flint, lips chapped to the point of blood. But her eyes, they didn't belong to a child. They belonged to someone who'd already buried their name. He knelt and offered the tea. She took it. Both hands, drank slow, and when she finished, she handed it back without looking away. There was no fear in her now. Just vacancy, like her soul hadn't decided whether to return yet. He didn't speak. Instead, he brought the basin, set it beside her, warm water, a scrap of cloth, a bar of lye soap. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. He stood outside a while, watching the prairie breathe. No wind, just the grass shifting like sleep talk, the kind of silence only known by men who've been left behind. He listened for the sound of the basin. Water splashing. It didn't come for a while, but when it did, it was delicate, like she was afraid the water might bite. Inside, she moved slow. She washed her hands, her arms, her neck pausing when the cloth brushed the bruises. She unbraided what was left of her hair, and strands came out in clumps. She didn't cry, just stared into the bowl like she might drown there and be glad for it. He waited until the sound stopped, gave her time, then opened the door again. She was sitting beside the basin, knees tucked to her chest, blanket around her like a second skin. The soap floated in the gray water like a drowning moon. He crossed the room and knelt again, same as before. But this time, he brought something else. A comb, old, bone-handled, clean. He held it out. She didn't move at first, but then slowly she reached for it. Her fingers brushed his. She began to comb through the wet mess of her hair. It tugged. She winced once but kept going. And then, something happened. The comb slipped from her hand, fell to the floor, landed between them. He picked it up, didn't ask, didn't gesture, just gently set it back against her scalp and began combing. Long, patient strokes. She didn't flinch. She sat still, stone still as he untangled the knots, smoothing down the pain thread by thread. Outside, a crow called, one call, then silence. She turned her head just slightly, offering the other side. A gesture, small. But it hit him harder than any gunshot, because in that moment, she let him in. Not fully, not forever, but in. And for a man like him who hadn't been trusted in years, it was enough to shake the ground beneath him. When he finished, he wiped the comb clean on his sleeve and placed it gently on the table. Still no words, but he didn't need them. He stood and walked to the window, looked out over the dry horizon, where the sky pressed down like a closed hand. She rose behind him, stepped barefoot to the door, opened it, and stood in the sunlight. The wind touched her then, light, curious, and it lifted the edge of the blanket, played with the strands of her hair. And for the first time, he saw something move across her face. Not a smile, not yet, but something soft, something like breath returning to a chest long thought empty. He stepped beside her. Quiet. She didn't look at him, but her hand, bare, small, fragile, brushed the back of his and stayed there. Just for a second, she reached into the folds of her blanket and pulled something out, something he'd missed before. A single string, braided, black threads woven with pale white ones. She held it in both hands, looked at it a long time, then tied it gently into her hair. She didn't explain. But the way her fingers trembled told him everything. The symbol had weight, and the ashes inside it had names. She didn't speak until the 5th day. By then, the bruises had faded from purple to yellow. Her cheeks had filled out, just slightly, and the nightmares had grown quieter, no longer shaking her shoulders in the dark, just twitching her fingers, like memories playing piano in her sleep. That morning he found her by the fence. She was stacking stones, flat ones, carefully, like it mattered where each one went, like they were people, or maybe prayers. She didn't hear him approach, or she did, and didn't care. He crouched beside her, watching. She placed the last stone on top and whispered something. A single word, too soft to catch. Then she looked at him, and for the first time since the tree, she spoke aloud. Do you burn your dead? The question didn't land soft. It cracked across the air like a branch underfoot. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the little tower of stones, sometimes. He said finally. She nodded. That was the right answer, or the only one she could bear. Her fingers drifted to the braid tied into her hair, the one with black and white threads. Papa told me to take it before they came. Told me to burn the rest, but keep this. Her voice was sandpaper, dry, careful. Like every word came at a price. They made him kneel. After, she said it plain. No tears, no tremble. It had become a story she told herself just to believe she was still alive. He looked away. The wind carried the sound of dry grass shifting, somewhere. A rusted weather vane turned with a lazy squeak. She spoke again. I tied some of the ashes into the braid, so I wouldn't forget. He didn't ask who. She didn't say, but he knew. The braid, those threads, it wasn't just hair. It was a funeral, a witness, a vow, and now it lived in her, swinging gently as she walked, a symbol carved in silence. She turned back to her stones. Started another pile. One for Mama, she said. Another stone. One for my baby brother. Another. And one for the dog. He didn't run. That one she placed slow, gentle, as if dogs had souls the wind could still carry. He helped her find more stones. By the time the sun hit the noon mark, there were 7 piles, 7 small memorials, and she stood in the center of them, eyes closed, like she was trying to summon ghosts just long enough to say goodbye. Later, back at the house, he brought out a small tin box. It had been his wife's. Once, a sewing kit. Inside were tiny spools of thread, each one still holding a bit of color. He offered it to her. Didn't say a word. She opened it, paused, and then pulled out a red thread, held it up to the light. Too bright, she said. Then she picked a dark green, earthy, almost black in the shadows. I want this one. He nodded. She wound it around her fingers slowly. Later that evening, as dusk settled and coyotes began their distant choir, she tied the new thread into her second braid, right beside the ashes, not replacing them, just joining them. That night, she sat by the fire and told him everything, and not all at once, just small pieces like ash falling from a shaken blanket. The wagon that never made it to Gallup, the soldiers that weren't wearing blue, the laughter, how strange it sounded when it came from men who hurt you. She talked until her voice cracked, then kept talking. He listened, unmoving, like a gravestone turned human again. When she finished, she looked at him for a long time, then said, "Why'd you stop riding with the others?" He hesitated, then said, "I shot the wrong man. Thought he'd done something, but he hadn't. That was all." She didn't press, but her eyes softened, just enough. Like maybe the land had claimed them both, not as victims, but as witnesses. The next morning, they walked to the river. Neither said why, neither had to. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth, old bullets he no longer needed, a broken spur, and one photograph he couldn't look at anymore. She carried a single stone, not for remembrance, but for release. They stood in the water, just deep enough to soak their boots. and as the sun rose behind them, she reached out and touched his hand, not to hold it, but to give it back. The river didn't speak much, just murmured over smooth stones the way old songs do when no one remembers the words. It wasn't deep, maybe up to their ankles, but it was cold and clear and alive. He stood beside her in the shallows, watching the current tug at her skirt. She held the stone in both hands, the one she'd carried from the memorial. It was round, light-colored, with a stripe of red clay cutting through the middle like a scar. She stared at it for a long time before dropping it into the water. It made a soft plop, then disappeared. She didn't flinch, just exhaled. He let the bundle fall from his hands. The bullet scattered first, silver winking briefly before sinking into the silt. The spur clanked against a rock, and the photo waterlogged before it even hit the surface, floated for a second before curling in on itself, then vanishing beneath the current. She turned and looked at him. "Do you miss her?" It was the first time she'd asked him anything personal. He didn't answer right away, just stared down into the water. The photograph was gone. "Yes," he said. She nodded. "Me too." They stood like that a while. Two shadows in a river that didn't remember names. Then without ceremony, without trembling, she reached for his hand. Small, dirty, thin fingers against calloused skin, and took it. Not to be saved, not to be led, but as if to say, "You're not the only ghost out here." The gesture broke something in him, not loudly, not all at once, but like ice cracking in spring. He didn't squeeze her hand, didn't speak, just let it sit there, her hand in his. Two stories tangled by silence and violence, and the hope of something neither dared name. They walked back together, still holding hands. That night, he cooked real food, beans with salt, cornbread, even coffee. She didn't smile, but she ate everything. When she finished, she brought out the sewing tin again. Picked a new thread, blue this time, tied it into the third braid. "What's the blue for?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "The river, simple." And yet it struck him deeper than any sermon ever had. They sat by the fire after that. She carved a stick with his old knife, shaping nothing in particular, just cutting away what didn't belong. He watched her. The way she moved, the way her eyes tracked the firelight, the way her silence no longer felt empty, but intentional. He realized then he'd stopped waiting for her to speak, and started listening to what her stillness meant. She handed him the stick when she was done. It was shaped like a small horse. He took it, smiled for the first time in years. She didn't smile back, but the corner of her lip moved just slightly. The next day, they rode together. Not far, just to the edge of the canyon where the grass grew high and the air smelled clean. He watched her scan the horizon like she was mapping it, not in fear, but with intent. "Will they come back?" she asked. He didn't lie. "Yes." She nodded once. "Then we'll be ready." No fear, just readiness, as if love had built its own armor inside her. That night, she asked if she could sleep outside. He said yes. She made a bed of dry grass beneath the stars, wrapped in the wool blanket, braids fanned out like a battle flag. He stayed up, rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon. But he wasn't watching for shadow. He was watching her, watching the way she rested now, not as someone hiding, but as someone who knew someone would fight for her if need be. And as the fire died to embers, he whispered the third word he'd spoken since all this began: stay. That night, the coyotes didn't sing. The prairie went still. But just before dawn, a single hoofbeat echoed on the ridge. She woke instantly, and so did he. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The braid with ashes stirred in the wind, the river blue thread shimmered, and the shadow on the horizon grew larger. They were coming back, and this time, they weren't alone. The rider crested the hill just after dawn, alone at first. Then 2 more appeared behind him, then 5, then 9. They moved slow, confident, like they already knew no one would stop them. He stood on the porch, rifle cradled in his arms, the girl behind him barefoot, silent, 3 braids down her back like stitched scars of memory and war. She didn't ask if they were the same men. She knew. One of them wore a red bandana, another had a scar that curled down his cheek like a claw mark. He remembered their kind, land scavengers, white vigilantes who called themselves reclaimers. Their justice was self-written. Their targets chosen by color, by blood, by silence. They rode like they owned the dust. He turned to her. "We ride," he said. She didn't blink. She nodded. They saddled up fast. No war paint, no prayers, just readiness. He handed her the old revolver. She weighed it in her hand like she'd known it before. "I won't miss," she said. And he believed her. They didn't ride toward town. They rode past the men, cut wide, toward the ravine where he'd set up old cattle traps in the early years, before life fell quiet. It was there the first gunshot rang. Not from him, from her. One of the men had broken rank, rode too close. She didn't hesitate, shot him in the shoulder. He spun from his horse and landed in dust like a thrown rag. They didn't stop to finish him. They had something bigger to do. He lit the first firebomb near the ravine's mouth. Smoke rose, thick and black, masking their path as they disappeared into the narrow pass. Behind them, the riders split, some pursued, others circled, but the trap had already closed. They reached the high ledge above the ravine. From there, they could see everything. The narrow bend below, the horses, the chaos, the dust curling like angry ghosts. He took his position behind a boulder. She knelt beside him, laid the rifle down, took a match from her pocket. "This is for Papa," she whispered. Lit the fuse. The second trap exploded and rocks tumbled. A horse screamed. One man fell and didn't get up. They kept firing calm, precise. She shot with no fear, no noise, just purpose. He watched her reload like someone who'd done this in another life. Then a glint of red. The man with the red bandana had found the upper ledge. He raised his rifle. The rancher didn't think, didn't aim. He moved, fast, took the shot, hit the man in the chest, watched him fall. It should have ended there, but nothing ends clean on the frontier. A bullet tore through the rocks beside her. She gasped sharply and fell back, clutched her leg. He was at her side, instantly son of blood. Not much, but enough to know what came next would have to be fast. He looked down at her, saw no fear in her eyes, just frustration. "I'm not done yet," she muttered. He grinned despite the smoke. "No," he said. "You're just beginning." He carried her down the side of the ridge fire still smoldering in their wake. The last rider turned and fled, horse limping. The fight was over, but the message had only just begun. At the foot of the ravine, he lowered her gently onto a patch of grass. She looked up at him, her braids tangled with sweat, blood streaked across her knee. Then she reached up and untied the ash braid. He froze. "You don't need it anymore," he asked. "No," she said. "I remember now. I don't have to carry it." She pressed it into his palm. "You carry it now, you're part of it." He didn't argue, just closed his fingers around it. And the braid, once heavy with death, suddenly felt light. That night, as they returned to the ranch under a bruised sky, she slept against his shoulder in the saddle, and for the first time, the sign that once hung around her neck, "White man wants revenge," was no longer a curse. It was a lie undone, burned to ash like the braid in his pocket, and the land, for the first time in years, was quiet, not afraid, just waiting for something better. The morning after the fire smelled different, not of smoke, not of blood, but of something faint, green, and honest, like sage after rain. The girl stood at the edge of the porch, wrapped in a fresh cotton shawl. Her leg was bandaged tight. She leaned slightly on a carved cane he'd shaped from the same stick she once whittled into a horse. She was taller now, Not by inches, but by presence. The braids were gone. All three. She'd cut them herself. Not in sorrow, but in ceremony. The ash braid had been buried beneath the piñon tree where he first found her. A grave of memory, not loss. The blue thread lay beside the river, tucked beneath a stone she'd placed with her own hands, and the green tied to the end of the horse's reins. 3 lives released. 1 new one stepping forward. He stood behind her. Quiet. She turned, and this time finally smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks permission, but the kind that says, I'm still here. He handed her a tin cup of river tea. She took it, sipped, then looked to the horizon. Where do we go now, she asked. He thought a long time before answering. There's a patch of land east of here, he said. Black soil. Not many folks, just enough. She nodded. Can we grow things there? He chuckled. We can try. They loaded the wagon slow, what little he owned, and what little she'd chosen to keep a folded blanket, the feather from the old saddlebag, and the sewing tin with 2 new threads, 1 gold, 1 bone white. She didn't say what they meant. He didn't ask, but she tied them around her wrist, and that was enough. As they rode out, they passed the tree. They passed, the one with the nail still rusted into its trunk, the one that had once held a sign meant to curse her. She stopped the wagon, got out, walked to the base of it, stood there a moment, just breathing. Then, without a word, she drew a knife from her belt and carved a single line beneath the nail, a circle, broken at the top, like a sun still rising. She stepped back, nodded, and returned to the wagon. What does it mean, he asked. She looked at him. Forgiveness, she said, for the land, not the men. They rode east for 3 days, past towns that didn't stop them, rivers that didn't try to steal from them, and skies that looked less heavy with each mile. On the 4th day, they reached it. A clearing, black soil, open space. He stopped the wagons, climbed down, helped her out. They stood there in the wind, both squinting into sunlight. She pointed to a low ridge. Corn can go there. He nodded. Water barrel on the north side. Barn, she asked. He grinned. You build it, I'll paint it. She laughed, a real sound, sharp and sudden, like joy finding its voice again. That night, they slept on the ground, no roof, no walls, just stars above them and dirt beneath, the kind of sleep that comes when the land has finally let you in. And when the wind came, it didn't howl. It whispered. Something about beginnings, and how not all of them come from birth. Some are dug out of ash and silence. There are stories in the West that never make it into books, stories written in blood, in braids, in silence. This was one of them, sometimes. Salvation doesn't come from saints or sermons. Sometimes it comes from a man who gets off his horse, from a girl who dares to sleep beneath stars again. The land does not forget, but it does forgive. Not all at once, not loudly, but inch by inch. It softens to those who have suffered enough, and maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath the dust and bones, that after all the hatred and hurt, what survives isn't vengeance. It's hands held across difference. It's quiet meals shared with no words. It's walking away from the signs nailed to our names and choosing to grow something new in the soil where pain once ruled. For those who've lost everything, know this: you don't have to carry the ashes forever. The braid can be untied. The land is waiting, and where the land forgives, so can we.